What's up, fucker? It's the Fights Gone By podcast. I'm your boy, the Lumpini legend, Sex Fairtex, and I've just got done eating a Cherry Bakewell digestive biscuit, which is the strangest thing I've ever eaten. We're coming at you on Thursday the 23rd of July, and we got some good fights this weekend. It's the last Fight Island card, and they actually went pretty all out for it. It's not bad. In addition, we got a Bellator card that doesn't look that bad. We're bringing back All In on Coca, but we'll talk more about that later. There isn't too much news except for the fact that Holly Holm versus Irene Aldana has been moved. So next week's card, which was looking shite, because that was the main event, now has Edmund Shabazian versus Uriah Hall as the main... No, that's the fight I wanted. Edmund Shabazian versus Derek Brunson as the main event. And as that's the fight I wanted, maybe I should take it up with the UFC, because me moaning about Holly Holm still being in main events apparently got this one cancelled. But we'll learn more about my mystical powers and influence later in the podcast when we talk about Scott Coker. However, the reasons behind this were, the real reasons, were actually pretty vague and confusing. Ronda Rousey manages Edmund Shabazian, so it looked like they were doing her a solid by putting him on the main event of this card. But it also looks like they never actually signed the Holm versus Aldana fight, which is truly strange. Even stranger is the fact that Holly Holm, 4 years removed from knocking out Ronda Rousey, and with like a 3-6 record in that time, is still headlining cards because she got an amazing contract to do so. And the UFC were like, oh, she'll always have star power. But anyway, let's talk about good fights. And I've just clicked the Bellator tab by accident. No, we're going to talk about the UFC Fight Island card. Let's go. So this is the one with the main event that we're all excited for. Darren Till versus Robert Whittaker. And not to harp on about it too much, but I did write a big tactical guide for the Patreon boys. Tactical guides are back, and I don't have a word count, which is fantastic, because I used to get annoyed at going over or having to stick to a word count for a start, not actually talk about all the things I wanted to talk about. So now, much as you like. And every tactical guide or article I write for the Patreon boys has an audio track, so you can look at pictures and listen to it instead if you want, which I know a lot of people want to do. So I got into like the real nitty gritty of this one there, but we'll talk about this briefly and just sort of like where each man is. Because Robert Whittaker, Darren Till has he had a hype train that ascended very, very quickly, because before the Donald Cerrone fight, some of us were paying attention to him and being like, oh, he looks pretty interesting. And then the Donald Cerrone fight sort of made him into something that he made him into something he wasn't quite yet. He's still very dangerous, but he hadn't been sparking people up to that point. He'd just been sort of like bullying people around, winning decisions, had that great fight with Nicholas Dalby. And then he fought Donald Cerrone, and, he was just the worst possible matchup for Donald Cerrone. Southpaw, straight hitting, lots of pressure. And, of course, Donald Cerrone is not very big at welterweight either. But anyway, he had that fight with Stephen Thompson, got rushed into the title shot with Tyron Woodley, and immediately hit a stumbling block. And then he fought Jorge Masvidal, and actually was doing pretty great. Like, if you watch that fight, he was lancing Masvidal up. Masvidal's had quite a bit of trouble with southpaws who hand fight well. If they cover his lead hand, his jab's one of his best weapons. And then he struggles to spot the... certainly most people who fight Till struggle to spot the left straight coming through. It's very, very quick, and it comes from down by his nips. All the defensive liabilities he has, because his head's up in the air and his hands are like down by his thighs a lot of the time, also makes it very tricky to see his punches coming. That and all the feinting. And the thing about that Woodley fight is that he couldn't really get his feints working effectively, because every time he tried to step in, Woodley would grab a leg or grab the clinch and threaten to take him down. And then you saw that, he didn't throw a single strike in the first round. His corner were like, why are you not throwing any strikes? You're just feinting. So in the second round, he immediately comes out, charges across the cage, and doesn't show a single feint, just dives in with a 1-2 and gets knocked down. But when his feints are on, he's very fast and very scary. But he has rebounded from those 2 knockout losses with the fight against Gastelum. And I remember writing an article before that, I think it was a Unibet, and saying, here's what Till could do to mitigate some of his defensive flaws, after his left straight. Because he lands this beautiful left straight, and then he's there to be hit. If he's not, pulled his head back or the opponent's fallen short, which is going to happen a lot less, I feel now, at middleweight, where he's, a 6-foot middleweight is not that big a deal. but a 6 foot welterweight is pretty big. But against Gastelum, he did a really good job of smothering Gastelum, because obviously Gastelum great at working in flurries or combinations, just throwing 2 or 3 punches at a time, maybe 4, chasing dudes down, very sharp 1-2s, but like he'll catch you on the counter, and he did that to Bisping, he did it to Belfort, he's done it to other 40-year-olds. But I like coming into that fight, I was like, that's going to be really difficult for Darren Till, because Gastelum can probably take the left straight and just throw back like Masvidal did. And Till did a great job of ducking into clinches and then throwing his left hand and moving into clinches. More so the ducking into clinches. He did a good job of like stifling Gastelum's offense. But in the course of that fight, I don't think he did an awful lot effectively on offense himself. It was more like, oh man, look, Darren Till's really shutting this dude down. But it was still spent entirely in the clinch. And a lot of the time, Till was putting his own back on the fence, which isn't going to, that shouldn't win a fight, but it will. Like, if it's just a clinch on the fence and one guy is half-heartedly attempting takedowns by, like, dropping on the hips and then going, oh, no, I can't get it, and coming back up and then dropping on the hips again, as Gastelum was, that's not a good look. You could very easily lose a decision there. However, as I was saying in my article, I think using the clinch well and punch and clutching, throwing the left hand, hitting them if you can and falling into the clinch so that they can't return really could help for Till if he can separate sooner. Watch Leon Edwards. Leon Edwards almost never stuck in a clinch against his will nowadays. Did get stuck against Kamaru Usman early in his UFC career, and I suppose that's the intrigue of the rematch, because Edwards has got better in the clinch, but in that first fight he never got off the fence. But if you watch Edwards leave the clinch, he always head posts, has one hand in the bicep, and then he elbows on the break. And if Till could shoot his left hand, enter the clinches, and then exit with the elbow when he feels comfortable, you can take a break in a clinch too. I think he'd be a very dangerous fighter. And then he wouldn't have to worry about all that, like, keep your hands up, keep your chin down bollocks that people are always like, well, you see, his hands were down, that's bad defense. I mean, it is. Hands down and only leaning back at the waist and relying on being very, very tall every time, not great. And I suppose that's kind of like the intrigue there from the Robert Whittaker side. He just had trouble with Israel Adesanya because he was running in on straight lines. Israel Adesanya, what is he, 6'4"? Tall lad at middleweight. But Adesanya would lean back and Whittaker would fall short and keep running. And Whittaker, never gets tired, so he never had that moment where he went, oh, shit, I should stop doing this. Amazing conditioning playing into bad habits there. And, but, they're very different in that Till just leans back or drops away and then leans back. Whereas, we did a Filthy Casuals guide to Israel Adesanya, and what he does very well is that he'll lean back and then he'll step back off on a 45. He's always angling off and framing off the chest of his opponent too, like hand on the chest to make it harder for them to follow, to keep his shoulders up, to protect his jaw a little bit. So some similarities, but not really the same. I mean, they're not really the same problem, but some of the same problems. And obviously Whittaker and Till are about the same height. It's not a big size disparity here. I think, I think I mentioned this before, but if you rewatch the Whittaker Adesanya fight, obviously it was a blowout, and that has led to people being like, oh, Whittaker never going to have a chance against Adesanya. But there were moments of success for Whittaker which he could have replicated. They're getting fixated on headhunting and just chasing. Well, firstly in the middle of the cage, which is partly Adesanya making sure he's always in the middle of the cage, but Whittaker would just charge towards the middle of the cage, and Adesanya would have all the room in the world to retreat, angle off into. If Whittaker could have made the fight towards the fence a bit more, whether that's by entering a clinch and pushing him, or using effective ring craft, or push kicking him like he did against Yoel Romero, that makes it a lot. You're taking away a good amount of the. If you put someone's back to the fence, that's 180 degrees of their motion that they can't really do, or angles that they can't leave on. But more importantly, the reason that Adesanya is able to get his head so far back is because he spreads his legs to do it. That sounded like a slut-shaming thing. No, but he puts his right. If you're leaning back and you've got your left foot forward, you put your right foot behind you. Unless you're doing the Muay Thai style, really quick limbo back and come straight back up again, which you do. You see dudes do a bit more with momentum. But if you're trying to lean back and then let the opponent fall onto you, you want your back foot going back. You don't just want you don't want your head behind your center of gravity too far. and nothing to catch you. Think Anderson Silva, Chris Weidman is like the absolute worst place to get hit. But obviously, when you're moving your head around, and we're going to get into this later because I've got a question about head movement, your feet tend to be pretty planted. If you're doing a really deep lean back and then you're going to shift back, as Adesanya always does, your lead leg is there and it's out to be kicked, and then you lighten it as you step back. And the times that Whittaker moved in and then kicked the leg as Adesanya was leaning back, he had good success. And that's how you can enter. You use the low kicks to knock his guard, knock his stance across himself, slow him down, get in on him. You don't enter by running straight at him and letting him angle off on you or lean back and counter you eventually. He showed, 20 charges in that fight. So, even if he wasn't slowing down, Adesanya had a good read on his timing. And of course, the real problem is that he wrestles in the off season. He gets up to 97 kilos, which is well over 210 pounds, maybe closer to 220. And he's wrestled successfully for Australia and qualified for the Commonwealth Games, but didn't represent Australia because the UFC were like, you get injured a lot already, let's not push it. But clearly capable of going after takedowns, in a wrestling format at least. But you only ever see him defending takedowns in MMA. You see beautiful chain wrestling sequences where he's sitting out, breaking the wrists, turning back into, the whole thing against Romero. There's sequences where he does sit outs and Granbies and all sorts of shit and gets back up. And then he never really goes on offense with his takedowns. And the thing about takedowns in MMA is that in some respects it's harder because the guy's going to be watching the distance and he's not, he doesn't have to engage you in a wrestling range. That's not how the rules are set up. But on the other hand, he is standing upright and he's not bent forward at the waist with his lead hand in front of his lead leg so that you can't do anything straight off the bat. You would think that Whittaker would be boxing into takedown attempts a lot more readily. And I said in my article, which again you should read, the post single could be a really good one for him here. Because Till has been standing so wide he was in his last fight. And that was one of the interesting changes that Till has made. In order to level change slightly and get the clinch when Gastelum entered, he stood longer. He used to stand very upright and retract the lead leg from low kicks and so on. And I think if he chooses to stand low, or wide, or whatever you want to call it, with that lead leg out there, Gastelum was able to kick it basically as much as he wanted. I think Whittaker should be kicking it, using it, knocking it across him and trying to get in with punches. And if he can, post on the lead shoulder with the right hand, like a right straight, and use that to drive him back and pick up the lead leg with his lead hand. Basically the reverse of Frankie Edgar's signature takedown. If you remember Frankie Edgar's career, he jabs the body, and then he jabs the shoulder, but with his palm open. And at the same time, his right hand goes down behind the opponent's lead leg, and he pushes them back, lightening that lead leg and allowing him to pick up a single. Really good takedown. Sometimes he can run straight through it like he did against Faber. Other times he'll pick up the leg and then he'll decide to drop the leg and throw a kick or drop the leg and throw a punch. Joe Benavidez has been using it recently. He was using it against Formiga because Formiga is an amazing back taker and you don't want him sprawling on you and running around to your back. But he was also using it against Pettis in that fight where he looked absolutely dreadful. It's a really nice... it's like a boxing takedown, basically. It flows really nicely from a boxing game. If you can establish your jab or show your jab, you don't have to be able to knock the guy out. But if you're touching him, he knows that when you step in, you're going to jab, and suddenly the jab goes to his shoulder and you've picked up his lead leg. It's much, much better. Certainly a lot trickier to see coming than when a wrestler comes out, dances around at 10 feet out, and then tries the old jab and shoot. I think you got two looks at what Till could be. He could go back to what he was at welterweight, which is a flustering pressure presence, where he backs the guy up onto the fence, and then he'll do the Conor McGregor sort of pioneered this in the big leagues of MMA. You push the guy to the fence, and when he comes back, you drop away and land a counterpunch. You're hurting him until he makes a mistake, and then you can land something really good. Or you could see Till try and fight on the counter, which he was trying to do against Gastelum, but wasn't super effective. He's not a very good, laid-back counter-striker. I don't want to say passive counter-striker, defensive counter-striker, because, the other side is offensive counter-striker. But you know what I mean, someone who waits for the opponent to come to them, as opposed to going out and making the opponent come back and offer up openings. I get into this fight in much more detail in the article, but it's a good one, and kind of don't want to see either guy lose, to be honest. I'm just thinking about how fast the falls from grace have been in the middleweight division. Like, since Anderson Silva, you had Weidman, who looked great and then took a beating from Luke Rockhold. Rockhold immediately got dethroned by Bisping in his first title defense. Bisping looked shit against Dan Henderson and then lost to a returning GSP. Whittaker and Romero took lumps out of each other. And now I'm thinking, oh God, what's going to happen to Whittaker in his next one? So what else is on this card? There's actually a fair bit of good stuff. You got, I say that, but you got, in the co-main event, you got Shogun versus Little Nog. And I went back and watched the second fight again. And I was like, oh, why haven't I watched this again? Oh, it was UFC 190, that's why. Because UFC 190 was just Ronda Rousey versus Bethe Correia, shit fight. Even at the time we were like, that's a shit matchup. And a bunch of old Brazilian dudes. The only good thing on the card was Damian Maia ragdolling, I think, it might have been Gunnar Nelson, might be Neil Magny. But it still did like gangbusters business. They sold amazingly just based on Rousey's name value. But their second fight was given fight of the night, and it was okay. I mean, it's important to remember that the first fight was 10 years before the second fight. And the second fight was kind of sloppy, and both guys were clearly past it. And that was 5 years ago from now. So don't have super high hopes for this one. But, two legends. And Shogun was kicking more in the second match, which we always like. Basically, for a while, it was like, is Shogun going to kick? Oh, he hasn't thrown a kick. He's probably injured, or at least got shaky knees. This fight's going to suck for him or me. I don't know which. Probably both. Whereas Little Nog, quite a competent boxer. If you compare him to Big Nog, who was sloppy as hell. Little Nog's game was always 1-2s, nice lean back right hook because he's a southpaw, and Big Nog's a orthodox fighter, and really good knees, like from the double collar tie. He just when he was doing his little run after Pride, when he fought in Affliction and stuff like that, he was just murking dudes with knees from the double collar tie. But in that second match, the first match was amazing. If you haven't seen the first match, I'm shitting on the second match, but the first match is an all-time great MMA fight because they met in a Grand Prix. They both knocked 7 bells out of each other, and both of them had like signature looks that you were looking for. The Little Nog deep half and the Little Nog front headlock work, great guillotine, threatened the Anaconda choke, but he was never like associated with it like his big brother was. Shogun was trying to stomp through his guard, and Nogueira was using the Kimura to transition into the armbar, which was very new at the time. The Nogueiras were on like the cutting edge of jiu-jitsu for MMA. And it's pretty crazy because people still go on about how like the deep half is not suited to MMA and you'll get hit and so on. And the Nogs were using it in their 20s, and they're still using it in these fights when they turn up in their 40s. And they're getting knocked out in the fights, but the deep half's still good. Like Ryan Spann, he got put underneath him, and he was like, nah, I'm going into the deep half now, mate. And Ryan Spann ended up standing up and falling over. And the other interesting thing about the Nogs is that like the deep half, if you play it from a jiu-jitsu perspective, you're taught get the underhook. The underhook is the most important thing, as in like the leg that you've got in your half guard, come up on that side, get the underhook. And that's because if they have the underhook, they can just pin you flat to the mat. What the Nogs are very good at is if the opponent has the underhook and has them pinned to the mat, they'll reach between their legs with their free arm and catch like inside the thigh, and then they'll use the hand that is underhooked, they'll put it under the opponent's chin and just push their face straight up in the air and turn into the deep half guard. And it's pretty crazy because he did it in the Little Nog did it to Shogun in this fight that I'm talking about, the second one. And Big Nog did it to Verdum after he'd been knocked down. In fact, he did it to Verdum in both their fights. World champion, ADCC heavyweight champion Verdum. Did he win ADCC or did he just come second? I can't remember. But, consistent staple at the top of heavyweight nogi. And you don't really see many other people doing that. Hand under the face, hand under the jaw, just stiff arm straight up in the air. Or at least I don't see a lot of people doing it. Maybe they do it all the time in like really good gyms, but you don't see it a lot. And it's kind of interesting because it's an application of the deep half guard from a disadvantageous position. Whereas, getting the underhook is like if you're playing the knee shield, you're in a grappling tournament or something like that. The Nogs enter the deep half guard from a situation where they've been put in half guard, flat half guard, bad half guard, or even like mount or quarter mount. But if we're doing memories right now, I want to say Luis Barnier Kane, the fight between him and Little Nog was incredible. Because Luis Barnier-Kane just sort of showed how far you can get as a southpaw generally in MMA, certainly light heavyweight MMA. His thing was he'd turn up, slap your lead hand down and shoot the left straight. That was your lot. And he'd throw the odd hard low kick. And he was storming through the UFC light heavyweight division, met Little Nog, who I think was making his UFC debut. And Little Nog was like, oh, but I am also southpaw, so you can't slap my lead hand around. And I can box. So he just lit him up. But yeah, don't have particularly high hopes for this fight. I mean, I hope there's some interesting grappling exchanges and stuff, but, watching these two strike on the feet now, it's just like watching two dudes coated in treacle moving around. Fabricio Werdum versus Alexander Gustafsson, which should probably be the co-main event, but that's out of nowhere, isn't it? I remember when Luke Rockhold had beef and was talking about going up to heavyweight to fight Werdum, I was quite like, okay, I'm intrigued by that. And then he went up to light heavyweight and just looked awful. But Alexander Gustafsson at heavyweight is something that I think since the first Jones fight, I mentioned it. Because in the Jones fight, everyone wanted Gustafsson to use his reach throughout his entire career, and he kind of doesn't. Or his height and his reach. Someone's going to pull up the fact that some of his opponents had longer arms than him. But, if they're punching up at him, he's 6'4" or 6'5" or whatever he is. People want him to fight longer, and he tends not to. Whereas when he fought Jones, who's his height and got longer arms, he boxed amazingly. Head movement and all that shit going on. Not so much in the second. Well, it was all right in the second fight, but And I said at the time, it would be interesting to see him fight more guys who are his height, and maybe going up to heavyweight would be a good decision for him. Especially as he has a pretty good gas tank. When you compare that to someone like Ovin Simprou, who relies on being huge for his weight class and strong, and has a terrible gas tank. That move to heavyweight was not a great idea, as it turned out. But Gustafsson versus Werdum, I mean, it's a weird one to jump in with for Gustafsson, especially as he's coming back from retirement. And Werdum looked like arse in his last one, but I would assume, it would be typical Werdum to turn up in shape and look amazing for this one, just when you're ready to be fuck Werdum. But quite interested because Verdum's defense has always been throw 1-2s and get back on offense. If you hit him, he throws 1-2, he just spams his hands and goes back on offense. Whereas Gustafsson, and I'm just wondering if that's going to work on Gustafsson, because Gustafsson, if he gets punched, he's just going to move out of range. He's not going to stand there and cover up and let Werdum grab the double collar tie over his arms or kick him in the body for free, which is what most of the heavyweights do. Werdum has won a lot of fights at heavyweight by just being game, being durable, having conditioning generally, not in his last one, and forcing the other guy onto the defensive, because heavyweights generally give up, basically, once things aren't going their way. The other thing is that Verdum's takedowns haven't been great, historically. His fight against Big Nog, he was not looking too impressive in the clinch. Big Nog held him against the fence for a good while and used the old head pin and pity-patter punch to the face. So I'm very intrigued. I mean, Gustafsson, if he's fannies around throwing too many kicks, obviously easy pick up and takedown for Werdum. But maybe Gustafsson's weird Willie Pep leading with the right uppercut style bollocks from the outside works really well here. I'm very intrigued, but I won't hold my breath because Gustafsson has not looked terrific in recent years. He took those fights with Jones, the first one, and the second one, and Cormier, being competitive with Jones and Cormier, he ended up taking beatings in those fights, and you think that it might have taken some of the promise of his career or his potential away. However, he murked Glover Teixeira, and Glover Teixeira is back in title contention. And really, all this makes you think is, God, I miss Rumble. I wish he would cut down from 300 pounds or whatever he's saying that he's going to do soon. What else is on this card? I mean, Khamzat Chimaev is back against Reece McKee. Don't know anything about McKee, but get another chance to see Chimaev. And I don't think anyone has fought twice during the quarantine and won in the UFC that I can remember. It tends to be guys win their first one and come back and lose the second one, having been I feel great. I barely took any damage in that first fight, and I'm in shape. And then they lose their second one. I think Kelleher did that. Or you lose the first one and you come back and you redeem yourself in the second one. But I can't recall anyone winning twice. So what I'm saying is, whoever Reece McKee is, bet on him. And what else we got? Alex Oliveira versus Peter Sabota. That could be fun. Sabota gave a good fight to Leon Edwards a little while ago. Really fun grappling and some swanging and banging in that one. And Alex Oliveira is always game and always willing to cheat. Even if he doesn't have to, he'll cheat. He just loves cheating. Carla Esparza versus Marina Rodriguez is only interesting because I bet on that going to decision. And the other interesting stuff is you got Nicholas Delby against Jesse Ronson. I think that's a last-minute replacement. Ronson is stepping in for someone. Tanner Bose's back, big, fun guy, throws combinations at heavyweight, so people love him. And he's fighting Rafael Pessoa, who made Cyril Gane look very good. Nathaniel Wood's back against John Castaneda after his tough loss to John Dodson. And one that I'm pretty excited for is Francisco Trinaldo versus Jai Herbert. Is it Jai Herbert? Jai Herbert? I watched all his fights today, and I still don't remember what the commentator said, so clearly I was paying too much attention to his fighting. But yeah, this is a weird one, because Trinaldo's on a, I think, 2-fight winning streak, just beat, McDacey? But yeah, he's in a good spot, or he should be in a good spot, and then they put him in with a guy who is storming off the regional scene. More casual fans won't know, so you won't get anything out of beating him, but there's a great chance he knocks you out. So, I hope Trinaldo's getting paid well, because that seems like a weird decision. But, I've got to like his chances in this one, because I watched Jai Herbert's fights in Cage Warriors today, and his thing is scrambly, great conditioning, and a good 1-2 that he throws constantly. Not an awful lot of variety on the feet. Nice right uppercut that he follows up with. And his knees look good in a couple of his fights, particularly the last one. He knocked out a guy with a nice knee in the clinch along the fence. I think he works with the Edwards brothers, which might explain all the headpin knee stuff that he does. But the 1-2 is his money, basically. He does it all the time. Constant 1-2s, shooting straight rights that, they don't look hugely powerful, but he manages to line them up right on the center line and just dink dudes on the chin constantly. Having said that, I was watching him, he'd won the title against, what was his name? Steve Grant. But the guy was walking around like a peacock with his head in the air, and then he'd lead with a right low kick from within range and get punched with a right straight on the chin, as a response. It was kind of weird, but he was getting taken. Jai Herbert was getting taken down by desperation low singles and so on, and getting mounted in a few of his fights, and just using that John Danaher style kipping escape to get back to guard. The mermaid escape, I think I've heard it called too. But really, his conditioning, scramble ability, that's what's carried him to all these wins on the Cage Warriors scene. And I think that's interesting because Trinaldo, savvy old guy, got that old man strength. Good top player, good clinch fighter. He will push you to the clinch and just take a break, which is, I think, part of the danger here for Herbert. Decent hard kicks, uses a good body kick, and his left hand is money. And of course, he's a southpaw, so you've got Herbert, who's so good at lining up these right straights and 1-2s on orthodox fighters. Suddenly he's switching to southpaw. Yes, the right straight is there, but it's a case of Trinaldo loves crossing people's right straights with his left overhand. And that's a wicked counter, and if he can land some of those on Herbert, it could be real trouble. So yeah, I'm just saying keep an eye on this fight. I think it's potentially a banger. Oh, and then Paul Craig's fighting Gadzhimurad Antigulov. And Antigulov is the perfect light heavyweight fighter because he wins or loses very quickly. People ask me, no, people don't actually ask me, but hypothetically people say, Jack, what if Bob Sapp had made it to the UFC? And the problem was always that Bob Sapp was too heavy. They don't have a super heavyweight division. Antigulov is what Bob Sapp would have looked like in a normal division in the UFC. He goes Donkey Kong for a minute or two, gasses out, gets knocked out. Or beats the guy up inside 2 minutes. It's great. It's perfect light heavyweight fighting because it means that the rest of the time they can throw back to the desk or show more adverts or anything that's better than a light heavyweight fight. How does he match up with Paul Craig? I mean, Paul Craig can at least go the distance, whereas he tends to gas himself within 4 minutes. But Paul Craig also doesn't take a shot very well, generally. So, you've got plenty of car crash potential in this one. The other thing about this card is that it's fucking massive. You've got, I think it's 15 fights, which is apparently the joint most the UFC's ever done, tied with UFC 2. So, yeah, going back to that. I could see this starting to drag. Though, they've got the decent fights spread out, but then that could just make the middle bits more difficult. You got Betch Coher versus Pani Kianzad in here. And then you've got Carla Esparza and Marina Rodriguez breaking up the main card. But oh well, everyone needs a wee break. And you can see when Dana takes his, as I tweeted the other day, there's a nice clip of him, and there's a door opening in the background behind the cage where the fighters are wrestling, and in comes the egg. Backlit by a blue light. And then the other thing going on this weekend, or rather tomorrow, is that Bellator is coming back. Now, Bellator hasn't been around since the episode we did All In on Coca, where I decided Because if you don't know, Scott Coker, king of mismatches or deliberate mismatches. The joke about him in kickboxing when he was a kickboxing promoter was that you could just bet down one side of the card. So I decided, it's Bellator, why not bet on all the favourites on the main card? So if it's a significant fight, bet on the favourite. And I did. And that card was a pretty great example of it if you looked at the matchups. They went away. They've come back. Their first card back. Much better matchmaking generally. So I bet on each of the favourites on the main card, but with the exception of the Pico fight, but then there's always a chance that Pico just does something stupid. They're all actually pretty even. You got Taiwan Claxton versus JJ Wilson. The betting favourite is Claxton, so I bet on him. This is all part of an accumulator or a parlay, by the way. And but both of them are like Bellator prospects, have had 7 or 8 fights in Bellator, and I think JJ Wilson's undefeated, but Taiwan Claxton lost to I can't even remember who. But that's a tough fight to pick. So, that's not our usual all-in on Coker fare. Then you got Jason Jackson versus Jordan Mean. I was looking at this going, Jordan Mean's pretty washed and he hasn't fought in 2 years. Luckily, Jason Jackson is the favourite. Went to decision with Ed Ruth. Pretty good guy in Bellator terms. So yeah, money on Jackson. And then the main event is Ricky Bandejas versus Sergio Pettis. And I think this is one of the better matchups that you'll see in Bellator. It's pretty competitive. Sergio Pettis was always in the mix at flyweight in the UFC and did decently at bantamweight. Never a great finisher. Comes to the UFC, immediately finishes someone in the first round, but gets wobbled doing so. Robin Black just put up a particularly wacky breakdown of that. Ricky Bandejas obviously known for kicking James Gallagher in the face, as everyone would want to. Bandejas, kind of a weird guy. He's a good scrapper, decent finisher, can make a fight of it with most people. But, he went 3 rounds decision with Juan Archuleta, which is pretty impressive because Archuleta was hot shit. And it was a very competitive fight. That's more impressive because Archuleta can just dominate people for 3 rounds. Does have that submission loss to Patchy Mix recently, but has rebounded with a couple of quick knockouts. I would, my guess would be on this one, if it goes to decision, probably better chance it goes to Pettis. If it gets finished, it's probably Bandejas. But it could be a good fight, and I'm actually quite excited for that. The poster is hilarious. It looks like something out of the old Def Jam games. They've just whacked this weird fake smile on Ricky Bandejas, or fake scowl, or whatever he's trying to do. But, I'm pretty excited to have them back. Something to laugh about, something to moan about. Love it. It's a British trait. We need something to moan about. So if you want to get in on Coker, the bets for me, at least at my bookie, these were the favourites. Pico, Claxton, Jackson, Bandejas. Which, interestingly, on Wikipedia is literally one side of the card. And the bet stake is £3 to return £13, which is actually not bad, because these stakes on all-in on Coker last time, you bet like £3 and you got £4 back for 4 correct bets. But if the more even matchmaking becomes a common feature of Bellator, you know who to thank. Your boy, Slacky J. You've got to keep betting on this shit to keep Coker honest. Time for a question before we get out of here for today. Hey Jack, love the podcast. I'm a long-time grappler and MMA fan, and I've picked up some striking knowledge just from watching and from listening to people like you break it down. But I still don't really know much of any strategy or tactics in that realm. One thing that particularly confuses me is head movement. I can see when people are able to evade punches and kicks, and obviously it's a very impressive skill to watch, as someone who knows nothing about it. So I'm hoping you could explain some of the basics around it. Where are you trying to move your head? Anywhere, just to be unpredictable? Does that change based on stance? For example, Andrade was moving her head a lot against Rose, but it looked like she was just bobbling side to side. Is this effective? Thanks, from Also Jack. Good question. Head movement is, well, I think I said it when we were talking about the Andrade fight. She had clearly gone away and gone, I need to move my head more, and was just moving her head all over the place. And you get a lot of that in MMA, especially back in the day when, if you threw a low kick occasionally, you were a Muay Thai fighter, and if you threw overhands, you were a boxer. You used to get guys like Rashad Evans, moved his head, jiggled it about, and then when he stepped in, his head would be straight on the line, so Machida could watch him stop, and then know he was stepping in and crack him with the counter. In fact, the last knockdown of that fight is the perfect example of that. Now, head movement is different in different striking contexts. For instance, in Muay Thai, as we've talked about, There's a lot more pulling straight back because typically they fight at a slightly longer range. You want to be like mid-kick, teeping range for a lot of the fight, unless you're, a Muay mat, guys who like punching, so you have to move in and make that happen. But generally the distance can be kept longer, and generally is longer, or can be pushed straight into the clinch. So you've got a small area where you're actually throwing hands. Whereas in boxing, the goal is to get in, and if you want to do more hitting, you've got to be in the pocket throwing hands and the hands are coming back. Obviously, tie-ups are still an option in boxing, but you can move your head around to stay in range to keep hitting. I always think of head movement as, the same way I do about blocking or parrying. There's only really two ways or reasons you should be doing it. One, the guy threw a punch and you were too close. Your footwork hadn't re-established the range again. Or a kick or whatever, and then you move, or block, or parry. The other reason is if you want to do something off that. I see guys parrying jabs all the time, and you're like, why? If you're just reaching to parry every time, like that's your go-to response, all you're doing is giving them that opening behind the hand. They'll jab and hook, or they'll do the Peter Ayats jab and left high kick. Peter Ayats versus Mighty Mo in like his last K1 Grand Prix. Fantastic example of that. Mo's reaching for the jab. Ayats just steps up as he jabs and kicks him in the head with the left high kick. Effortless. Really like just a light looking kick from Ayats. Not one of his like wound up headache makers when he pushes dudes out of the clinch and he knocks him out. Whereas if you parry the jab and you immediately shoot a right hand off it, or swing a left hook back like Mark Hunt used to, that's you moving the jab so that you can move in and make something happen. And I feel like head movement, in MMA at least, should probably serve the same purpose. Do you want to slip the punch to move in and counter, or you want to slip the punch to get into the clinch? There's no point, like, as much as it is impressive to watch Pernell Whittaker do, slip 5 punches in a row, there's not much point to it in MMA. Especially as the guy, if he's got any sense, is going to start throwing a jab, maybe a half-assed right straight, and throwing the high kick after it. Tons of knockouts from just the right straight to right high kick in MMA. Takeshi Sato knocked out Kao Luno. Maurice Smith knocked out some dude when he was 45 years old by doing that in MMA. You just get the guy moving his head and you just throw the high kick up afterwards. Don't even need to kick hard. He's going to duck his head onto your shin. In terms of like how much you move your head, the thing that everyone always says is just enough to have the punch miss, which is easier said than done, but you really want to keep everything inside your stance, is how I'd say it. Because if you get into the habit of really deep slips when you don't need them, it's very hard to come back. And also, especially in MMA, Muay Thai, anything where the guy can just start leaning on you. Or even in boxing, Deontay Wilder versus Tyson Fury. Every time Deontay Wilder's head went down, Tyson Fury put his forearm across the back of Deontay Wilder's neck and just leant on him. And carrying or trying not to fall over underneath the weight of a 250-pound man very quickly wears on you. In MMA, obviously, the danger of the snap down, holding for the knees. Lots of nasty things can happen if you get caught really deep slipping. Same is true with weaves. Like in boxing, the weave is a very legitimate way to level change. You bend at the waist. And if you watch Rocky Marciano, that's basically all he ever did. He had a 250-pound heavy bag or whatever it was, and he would weave underneath the bottom of it between throwing combinations on it. He did retire due to back injuries, but that's neither here nor there. The weave is awesome in boxing. It's not so great when the opponent can just lean on the back of your head or pull you down or snap you down or whatever. In MMA, typically you want a level change at the knees, which in boxing is typically called a dip. Though a lot of people don't differentiate between a dip and a weave, but a weave for me is at the waist, a dip is at the knees. And of course, there's nothing to stop you doing a little bit of both, to make a bigger motion out of smaller motions from each part. But typically, when you move your head to your left, your weight goes over your left foot more, and when you move your head to the right, your weight goes more over your right foot. So if you slip left, you can immediately come back with a left hook. If you slip right, you can immediately come back with right straight, right hook, whatever you want. But by staying over your knees, as it were, you give yourself a much smaller... You give yourself enough motion that you can slip punches and you can go further if you really need to, but you also keep yourself in position to come back. There's nothing like watching dudes lean way out of the way and then come back and just miss by miles. You're talking about milliseconds in this game. I think people get obsessed with slipping punches and really having a little bit of head movement all the time, not like Andrade, but just a little, is really helpful for getting out of the way of punches. Not only do you add just a little bit of complication to the opponent, having made a joke about that Robin Black video about the, synapses and shit, I'm about to say something like, I'm about to say, the geometry in your head, but, when you throw a ball or you catch a ball or whatever, your mind is projecting where the ball's going to be, and some guys are good at it and some guys are bad at it. But with punching, if you add a little bit of head movement or a little bit of a bounce or a little bit of any sort of movement, you're complicating the equation in his noggin just a little bit, making him maybe a little less comfortable throwing punches at you than if you were standing, completely static. It's also easier to move off a mobile, off a little bit of bounce. And that's true of like every striking sport. If you're already in a little bit of motion, you are ready to go when you need to go. And the time that head movement really makes most of the difference for, my eye when I'm watching MMA is not slipping punches and coming back. It's after you've thrown your blows, how are you either exiting or staying inside? If you want to exit, you can leave out the side doors, and you can do that by dipping or weaving or just plain sidestepping. And you can do that by level changing slightly and hitting him chest to chest, or you can do that level changing onto a takedown. But all of those are head movement. Or you can level change expecting a return, or shoulder roll expecting a return, or get your guard up and try and slip expecting a return, and come back with punches of your own. Certainly, I think that's how people coming to MMA or learning striking to come to MMA are going to have the most success. Lead, move your head, return. And then if they don't throw back, all you've done is move your head and return, and you've broken up the rhythm of your attack. And if they do return, you've done something to make it harder to hit you. And Darren Till is a perfect example because he throws his left straight and then he does nothing about anything coming back. And I think that's the most important thing about head movement, considering the return at all times. It's not about being Tyson. It's not about getting the guy to jab at your face so you can slip inside it and throw the right hand across the top, which does work wonderfully. It's an amazing entry. Or slip to the inside and come back with the left hook. It's more about not getting knocked out by a dude you've just punched in the face and who's thrown back blind, basically. And for that, there's no better exercise than the double end bag. Get yourself a double... Oh, no, they've got those new ones that I have not used yet. A cobra bag. I think it's a cobra bag. It's like the thing on a wobbly stick. I saw Garcia doing it, and I was like, oh, having that. But the double end bag is the same principle, but you throw your 1-2 or your 1 and it comes back and you let it slide over one shoulder or the other, and then you throw a couple more punches. And you build from there. If you watch someone like Roy Jones on the double end bag, he does some pretty crazy stuff with it, like tripling up left hooks and uppercuts. But, the basic gist is you send it away from you with a nice hard straight punch, and then you slip it on the return, maybe once, twice, and then you come back with another punch. I think that's the thing that people don't get about striking generally. It takes a bit of imagination. And this is the difference between training and practice. And, it's something we could get into at a later date. But your running, your lifting, all that shit, that's just training. The numbers really don't matter as long as you're getting the training in and improving your base skills. Not skills, base abilities. When you're talking about practice of something you're actually going to use in your chosen field, where you're actually trying to pursue a goal, just putting in the reps with like shadowboxing, or just putting in the rounds on the heavy bag or the double end bag or whatever because you're told to, not nearly as useful as actually picturing what if the dude came back. Because so many people just forget that there's a person in front of them, especially on the heavy bag. Boxing trainers get really angry about that. There's a person in front of you, you've wailed on them with a 6-punch combo, and then you're just dropping your hands, But yeah, head movement, most importantly, is about making yourself difficult to hit after you've thrown your own punches. And too much head movement means you're moving between your legs, you can't pick up your leg at any point, and they can kick you in the leg for free. And if anything, kicking is the meta in MMA at the moment. Because dudes were starting to box well, and now we're going back to just kicking people in the leg until they stop boxing. Anyway, cheers, Jack! Right, I reckon that'll do us for today. If you want to get in on the Patreon, read the tactical guides, the film rooms, all the stuff we do for the Patreon boys, and support the podcast, please do. If you want to send an email to the podcast, fightsgonbypodcast@gmail.com. And if you want to see what I'm writing at any time, fightprimer.com. I'm your boy Jack Slack, and Bellator has turned me into a degenerate gambler. Cheers.